So last video, number 10, I think, yeah, number 10, last video, I said if C were 440, and for those who know their music, they would know, wait a minute, the C note doesn't have that 440 hertz rating. That's the A note. But I went ahead and left it like that. I said if C were 440, just because I have a mind loose around the edges, ready for transposing, where C is just a name. It could be a number, the one note, C. So where the 440 tuning has A as its label, you can just switch the labels out. Of course, you'd have to transpose all the way through the scale to adjust every note in the scale for renaming. You could decide you don't even want to use alphabet letters. You could decide you don't want to use numbers from the standard numerical system. All kinds of options. Sheet music doesn't use numbers or letters. It has its own special notation marking. And those notation markings still represent the vibrating notes that are designated for the positions represented on the staff, the sheet music staff. So I approached it that way, from loose around the edges, open for transposition, and not trying to get caught up in what things are called, but to let the geometry and the open dynamics for complex system operations, to let that do the speaking, let that be what defines what's going on. It's too easy to be caught up in having everything named, just looking at every detail. It's got this name, it's got that name, it's called this, it's called that. And pretty soon your focus is tasked with managing all of that and conjuring all of that. And so where is the balance of the focus, and how much of a balance of focus do you have for what's really going on? The system dynamics, where it's changing, where it's moving, where being fixed according to what a name or a label fixes you to, might become a handicap in latching onto the system for what it is, which is something that's moving and changing. And so how well are you able to move and change your terminology or your idea of what something is, and the names and labels that your idea is attached to? So things have to be open, fluid, and ready for moving along with the system. And I guess people naturally shy away from being that loose around the edges because of the concern of chaos. You're going to enter chaos and be lost to confusion. And so we've already addressed chaos and how to navigate through that and find the underlying order. As simple as just looking at this and saying, there's a way to walk across it. People do it. Maybe in some areas you have to do climbing, but there's footholds that you can plant into and make progress through it, and know that it's a course and that you can repeat it again and again without falling into the pitfalls of chaos. We worry about chaos for being out of control, that we fall into who knows what, damages, utter loss of life. So those are legitimate concerns when you don't have the right approach, the right understanding, the right mentality. And when it's really complex, the beginnings of the right approach and right mentality are open, loose around the edges, adaptable to changes, and ability to spot where the changes are needed and that the changes are needed, when they're needed. These are things that are practiced in, if you're an avid music composer, these are things practiced there. Whether you're playing chess, two sides of the board, acting against or reciprocating movements, reflecting movements across the board, trying to get a particular outcome, and the flexibility of options that you have for each piece and each of its movements, and then also each piece defined by limitations to its movements. So a balance between limited movement options and open movement options. Some aspects of movement are limited and other aspects of movement are open to options. So you can only move in a certain pattern of movement. You can only make so many steps per each move, but maybe the direction in which you can apply your move, you have options. So keeping loose around the edges, keeping options open for navigating the system. And that has to do also with understanding the system. You can navigate it. What better way to demonstrate that you understand it? So that also brings up the question of, well, was it a mistake or was it not a mistake? Well, if it's a arbitrary situation and it's open to options, having taken one option instead of another, does that mean that one was a mistake and the other was not? It's like an equation constructed out of variables, and some equations with their variables have it such that many answers apply as accurate as the correct answer. So the equation would have A and B and C as factors in the equation, and the correct value for A or B or C could be a wide array of options. A could be 3, A could be 5, A could be 6, and either of those options would not be wrong, depending on the equation. So there's circumstances where you have variables for accuracies, and you have I'll just leave it at that, variables for accuracies. So you can be right in a number of ways, and being right in one way versus the other doesn't leave the other way as being wrong. It just leaves the other way waiting to be applied as also a right answer. So in some cases you'll have mistakes, having done something wrong, that applies as well. But then even in the cases where you make mistakes and do something wrong, there are situations where you approach the mistake without being concerned of it being a mistake, but approach it to study it and understand how it went wrong, and study how it went wrong in comparison to what you intended, and also reflecting upon what happened as a function of what you did not intend to happen, and looking at all of that. And in looking at all of that, you can often come up with an understanding that's better than the understanding you had before you started and ended up making the mistake, and come up with an understanding that's better than even if you had made the correct answer and gone along with it. And so you come up with a new idea of the problem, the approach, and what the best solution would be. And when you find situations like that, you start to value making mistakes. Now, that's not always a convenient thing, to just play around with making mistakes and seeing what kind of learning you can do from it. Now, some mistakes that you shouldn't make, you'll still make them anyway, and you'll have to learn from them. But if you can avoid certain mistakes, then you should. It all depends on the circumstances. Sometimes the mistakes are too costly to just play around with. And even where the mistakes are most costly, nothing is 100% avoidable. If it can happen, it's not 100% avoidable. So even where the mistakes are too costly and you must avoid them, there's still going to be the circumstances where the mistakes are made. And so what do? Well, you're going to have to recover from them, but it's still very important to learn from them and do, what was just mentioned not too long ago here. That you learn from the mistake in comparison to what you intended, and also reflecting upon what happened as a function of what you did not intend, and hopefully coming up with a better idea and understanding of the situation than you had at the very start, where a correct outcome was intended. You might find a better option of a correct outcome just because of the mistake, even in the worst situations where the mistake is too costly to be playing around with. So either way, always having to learn. So anyway, it's about keeping loose around the edges and open. People would say, oh, you got to tighten it up. And if you're holding on tight to something, even if it is functioning as the right way for you, evolution still applies, that there's always improvement and advancement awaiting, no matter how good you've got it. No matter how bad you've got it, improvement and advancement's waiting. And always in the mix of whatever our circumstances are, good or bad, we're holding on to something, whether it's a perspective, an approach, or so. So we have a general practice of being loose around the edges. It can be as simple as loose around the edges of what we call something and the ideas we hold around the names and labels that we give the something, which is the same as what we're calling something, what we're naming or labeling something. Loose around the edges with that could be where we begin to loosen around the edges of our perspective about things. Language is supposed to be a bridge between perspective and reality, but often it can be a chasm. It can create a deep chasm between perspective and reality. It all depends on the position that we have language take in our approach to reality. I don't know if that really explains it the way that I understand it, but how we hold language in the picture of the relationship between reality and our perspective, how we regard language can really influence whether language becomes a bridge or a chasm. So it's possible to have all the fancy terminology, and be able to name every little detail in a fancy way that it confuses the average person. And so now you've lost majority of people as far as an understanding audience. Even if they're willing to be, are they able to be when you've coded everything in language that's beyond them? Maybe they couldn't afford to go to the places where you accumulated that kind of language collection. So it doesn't mean that the understanding cannot exist outside of that language collection. And sometimes the language collection comes at such a tedium that the understanding behind it gets limited by the language, as so much is put into the language structure for describing everything, that there's not much room left for a richness of description, which would begin to structure understanding. And then description itself has to take a form. And that's still connected to language. And so there's layers of language functioning between where it's spoken in the word or written in the word versus where it's imaged in our minds and our experience of things. So how many layers we go through between our minds and writing things down, that's a whole other thing. And that whole other thing in itself is very complex, and you're going to have to be loose around the edges to delve into that. You're going to have to let your sense of what language should be fall apart to then be open to discovering the complex rabbit hole that it comes from, the deeper source within us, and our connection to reality, and our mirroring of reality, and then trying to express that forward, to reflect that forward. So openness and looseness around the edges can be a very complex thing also when you get into it. The idea that we should have closure. Let's sort something out and have closure. The idea that you're supposed to wrap it up, close it up, and have it bagged versus Let's unravel it and make it wide open. Let's reveal it. You unravel it, leave it wide open, reveal it, and let it express itself for what it is. So that's another way to think about being loose around the edges, open for evolution. Perspective about it. Let's wrap it up and have closure. Address it, wrap it up, and move on with closure. So, is it really a closed system anywhere? Is the land here a closed system that doesn't involve the ocean? Is the ocean a closed system that doesn't involve the atmosphere, the winds kicking up the waves? Is the atmosphere a closed system that doesn't involve the land, the water, and things beyond the atmosphere, beyond the stratosphere? And so the perspective needed for the answers to that question come with opening, peeling layer after layer for opening, and not creating closure, but creating opening. Loosening up the tight packaging that limits our perspective. So I'm here on the other side of the bay. There's this scattered outcrop here, and on the other side is where the beach side is, and that's where the sandy section is. And the outcrop here on this side not really any beach. So I'm up on the cliff looking down, and it's all just jagged rocks. So the water action doesn't deposit sand or even fine pebbles. It's all rocky stuff. So that's one end of the bay, and that's the other end of the bay. And then a scattered outcrop dividing two sections of the bay. And one side, in contrast to the other, that side collects the sand and makes the beach possible. This side doesn't collect sand and doesn't make a beach possible. That side does carve in deeper. So there's a deeper inset for the beach and making it safer for people to gather. Whereas here, the cliff is just right here. Everything just runs straight into the cliff and washes back. So swimmers stay on that side, and occasionally you'll get some swimmers, very few, who can swim long distance, and they will venture onto this side. And some of the swimmers that venture onto this side, it kind of worries people on shore, and they might try to stop you from swimming on this side of the outcrop. So there's some experienced swimmers around here who know how to do it, when's a good time to swim this way and when it's not a good time to swim this way. But it is interesting how you have this scattered outcrop dividing the bay, maybe not evenly, but nevertheless looking like it's paying homage to the middle way, even showing characteristic mirroring of contrast. One side collecting sand, one side doesn't collect sand, and so that means that side has a beach, this side doesn't have a beach. So two sides mirroring each other in contrast. And could a middle way dynamic be why we have that outcrop there? That when the lava flow creating this cliff face, when that lava flow came and met the ocean, that there was something about this location in the distribution of the forces in the water that allowed the lava to deposit like that. Or maybe there just was a deeper trough pre-existing and going down into the water, and that trough being a pathway for the lava to have easier flow in that line right there. And so it flowed more freely into that line, able to build up more at that spot. But then that brings the question, why would that trough be there in the first place? Was it also a part of some kind of hidden dynamics with the middle way being a part of its workings? So anyway, that's going deeper into speculation within possibilities that physics easily allows for. The way lava flow goes at the very basic is that it flows into the low point in the ground, and it fills up the low point in the ground. So a trough would be a low point. It just has freer flowing into the low point. And when it fills up the low point now becomes a high point, and then the lava flows over what used to be the high point, because the low point is now the new high point. And so one area filling up until it makes the surrounding areas look like they're lower down. Then it fills the lower down areas and makes it look like it's higher up, and then moves up and down, up and down. And interesting that the waveform, an upside to a downside, an upside to a downside, on and on progressively. See the waves coming, the down part, the up part, the down part, the up part. And so in between two up parts, you have a down part. In between two down parts, you have an up part. And so even in the waveform itself, each part of the wave, from one peak to the other, you have a middle, which you'd call a trough. That would be the middle way. If you're focused on the trough, in between two troughs, you'll have a middle. And it would be the peak and middle way dynamics. That very well could be the that very well could be the secret behind the waveform. it's playing out the oscillation between two sides of the middle. Anyway, I don't think I came here to talk more about the middle way, but that's inevitable, it seems. Came to this side for a contrast perspective, and it shows how the bay contrasts itself around the middle way with this outcrop. The outcrop is a scattering, and even though I'm implicating it in middle way symmetry, it's sort of offset symmetry. Broken symmetry is a common term out there, and it just means symmetry that's scattered outline of symmetry. That it wanted to be symmetry, but something was keeping it scattered from very clean, symmetrical lines. Symmetry can be taken and broken apart, scattered until the appearance of symmetry is gone, and then it'll prove to be asymmetric, non-symmetry, asymmetry. And would that be broken symmetry? I'd say so. Now, in the same way that you could do that with symmetry, what about coming out here and taking this outcrop, looking scattered, looking asymmetric, just by itself, and saying that's broken up, scattered? Is there a way to break up its broken form and shift it and arrange it a little bit to where it starts to look like a symmetrical shape? Where you can take symmetry, break it apart, and shift things around until it looks like an asymmetrical shape. So taking asymmetry, broken symmetry, breaking it up, shifting things around until it looks like a symmetrical shape. And so once you get that contrast between symmetry and asymmetry, one coming from the other, regardless of which one you begin with, it puts the perspective about the idea of what's what. One could come from the other. Which one is the origin? Is symmetry the origin? Is asymmetry the origin? Is order the origin? Is chaos the origin? And so I'd say it's like the chicken being the origin, but then you realize, well, the egg is the origin. Inside the chicken you find the egg, inside the egg you find the chicken. So which one's the origin? Well, it's the egg. Look inside, you'll find the chicken. Okay, you get the chicken. And then one day you look inside the chicken and you find the egg. And so you say, oh, it's the egg. And then one day you look inside the egg and you find the chicken. And you say, okay, it's the chicken. And then one day I could keep going on and on in that loop. Such is the middle way. And it drives itself back and forth, round and round, up and down, side to side. And in all of that, you have movement, mass and motion, energy, expression, everything. So I've talked enough about that in other videos, but I just wanted to bring the example of the bay being split two sides. Just come to this side of the bay and get that perspective and show the example of it. I was in the segment of prediction. I think 2 videos on prediction so far. So this would be a continuation or maybe wrapping it up. I think I've mentioned enough about predictions. And so that's predictions from the perspective of logic, geometry, logic. If you're a musician and you play free form, there's a certain art of predicting what's going to come. If you're just free form playing with other musicians, there's a certain extent of predicting each other's moves. And the better you are at that, the more musical you sound in your performance. And there's something to that. How do musicians know when it's time to make that change in the groove, and that they all do it together and they're doing it without a standard piece of music or a common guiding sheet music or something to set them all on the same page? They do it intuitively, instinctively, and so the ability to make predictions in complex systems is just a natural part of what we are as life forms. And it goes deeper than logic and geometry, which is what I've been talking about. And so I'll end my talk about prediction within the realm of logic and geometry as I have, and just mention that a whole world of predictions happen outside of the realm of logic. I have that going on in my life, predictions coming about from sources and in ways that defy any logic or geometry that I know, defies any reason, but the results fall very well in the way and place of results that come from logic and geometry. So I'll get logical results from sources that I can't explain, and there'll be sources that are giving predictions about something, effective, useful predictions. So prediction goes a whole lot deeper, just like logic and making sense of the world in general goes a whole lot deeper than what you do with a ordinary, common, rational mind. And it could be that rationality and logic has a whole lot of evolution to do. Science, technology has a whole lot of evolution to do in catching up to where life is in its prowess with reality. That life has had a relationship with reality since long before science, math, logic, playing music instruments and all of that. That relationship has been there. And that because of that relationship, things learn and grow out of that relationship. That science itself, logic itself, has evolved out of that relationship. And so I try to remember to not make the mistake of thinking that everything's supposed to relate to logic and science before it can represent reality or tell the story of reality. The story of reality was being lived and evolved with by life long before science and technology. And science and technology, logic, geometry, all of that's a product of that relationship. So trying to not have a backwards view, and then according to the middle way, which view is front or back, which view is up, which view is down. It's all a matter of your position in it. But either way, still trying not to have a backwards view. It wouldn't be the middle way if you weren't having some contrast or doing some kind of a contradicting, putting it all to the test. So predictions, there's a whole lot more to it, more than I can say anything about. If I'm going to make predictions outside of the realm of using logic, mathematics, statistics, and all of that, I'll just make them as a casual part of living my life, and that's all, and getting whatever usefulness or effectiveness I can out of them. Not trying to make a YouTube video sensation out of predictions, just trying to share ideas about geometry of music and logic. I think maybe I've covered enough. What did I do? I went over, that's like a little bay within the larger bay, from that end to that end. So you have a little bay there that's forming a shore. Sometimes sand will gather there and you'll get a little beach, but it's not steady or stable. And there's another little bay. That's the one where I stand on the edge there and look down at the rock scattering to see the middle way gathering of rock distributions on the ground there. And then on the larger scale, went onto the beach and showed rock deposits on the beach that were gathered by middle way dynamics, the waves coming together and dropping rocks where they come together. And in this video, looked at the entire bay, and somewhere in the middle, on the close to the middle, functionally the middle, there's an outcrop where the lava flow flowed, an outcrop that creates a feature that looks like it's trying to divide the bay in half along the shore. And that's for the large scale of the entire bay to look like the entire bay has a middle. And then little sections within the bay fractal out with their own little middle sections of the area. And so it's a scaling system, a scalar system. On the small scale, you see the dynamics, then expanding out the dynamics. Could there be something to why we have these two little bays here, that there's a middle way dynamics for this little area? And then on the beach, seeing that. Now, what about on the larger scale beyond this bay? Well, I'll have to admit that on the larger scale, there are places where giant waves, I can't imagine if it was your regular earthquake generated tsunami, maybe not a regular one, but a very big one. Definitely in Japan, they have places where a history of tsunamis have caused little hills to form in certain areas. Now, next to a human, the hill wouldn't be so little. It'd be a hill that you could climb onto for high ground. And in fact, people have learned to go to the hill and use it as high ground along the shore where they can stay dry. And there's one of those hills in Japan where generations ago they put a stone pillar with carvings on it that contains the message about the hill, saying that when a tsunami came, that the two parts of the tsunami wave met over that hill and crashed together and created a huge splash up that washed away everyone who used the hill as high ground against the tsunami. And so that was a case where they found out the hard way that that hill was created by deposits of rocks carried in tsunami waves. And because the tsunami waves only come once in a generation or every 2 or 3 generations, it's easily forgotten. And so one generation did put up the stone pillar to mark that fact about the place. But over 100-200 year period, people can use that hill as high ground when there's big wave events, maybe even big waves from typhoons or hurricanes. They'd be safe. But tsunami events in the region there would have a way of causing waves that smash together at that hill's location and then deposit their contents at the hill's location, which is what the hill is, a deposit of rocks that were brought in by waves, just like it does down here on the small scale. Now over there it's on a large scale where it's probably 100 feet above sea level, the deposits. The tsunami waves can come in 100 feet high, and then we're talking about two sides of the waves or two wave faces crashing into each other and splashing up well above the actual height of the wave itself. And so it can probably pile up a hill of deposits that are higher than the actual wave coming in. And because the waves keep meeting like that at that location, they have the trend of building up rather than washing away, a net gain of building up the hill rather than washing it away. Now, I think I've even seen middle way dynamics play out on a larger scale, looking at an area of coastline in Mexico where everything was flat swampland and mountains in the far background, everything on the scale of many miles between the coast and the mountains in the background, 10 miles easily, maybe more. And everything flat and swampy between the coast and where the mountains start to rise. And so it made it look like the ocean had swept that area over and over again and washed it down so low that even the areas above sea level are marshlands, and they hosted crocodiles, all kinds of wetland birds and stuff like that, and a really wide area, so it had a extensive range of habitat for wetland birds and crocodiles. So it's a real wildlife sanctuary, wetland wildlife. So I was looking at it, everything's so flat except this one hill, and that hill had the old fort, probably at the founding of the town. The seafarers that landed there and founded the town built the fort on the highest ground, which was that hill in the middle of the flat plains. And so I did a geometric survey, looking at where the hill is relative to wider bay features, which were many, many times larger in scale than even this bay that probably runs a mile across. That place in Mexico was running tens of miles, probably more. And just looking at the geometry of how waves would sweep on that scale, and having the benefit of Google Maps to look at it, aside from actually being there and traveling around the area to see how the land follows. So looking at Google Map and seeing that the waves do want to meet at where that hill is. Except this is on such a large scale. This is beyond earthquake tsunamis. So this could have been something from many, many thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. It could be over millions of years. And I would imagine cosmic impacts into the ocean so large that it generated waves so high and so sweeping that, yeah, it could wash out easily 10, 20, 30 miles of coastline going inland. So wash 10 miles in, and not just wash in, but scour everything out and flatten it, and be such a huge event that it would sweep in and out again and again for days before settling down. So that's on a larger scale, but then also on a larger time scale for recurrence. Like the Japanese tsunami events would be every 100 to a few hundred years. I heard something like a 300-year cycle, could be 100, 200-year cycle. They definitely had to put a stone pillar up to mark information about the events to carry through several generations. So definitely 100 years, because they only get to see one in their lifetime, and maybe it even skips the next generation. So easy to forget. So that's how you know the intervals between the events are very long, and larger scale events taking a longer time to come about, and that there are events that are even much larger scale, which take also a much larger time scale for their occurrence, every multiple tens of thousands of years. I'm into the story about cosmic impacts 12, 13,000 years ago or so. There's evidence of impactors hitting the Earth 50,000 years ago or so. It's not just the 65 million year ago dinosaur extinction event. There's a whole lot of other stuff. Some just get more attention than the others, especially something like a dinosaur extinction event that, for good reason, would get a lot more attention, because there's just so much evidence of animals, wildlife, that we see nothing of other than in fossil records. What happened to them, and then evidence of their disappearance being so sudden, and then having a cosmic impact event related to the time that they disappeared. So we hear a lot more about that, but then there's talk about 13,000 years ago, there was an extinction of megafauna in the North America, maybe even in Europe. Megafauna that no longer exists. You see their fossils, and the record shows that it was around 10, 11,000 years ago that they disappeared. and now stories about cosmic impact events from that time. And then also mega flooding related to that. So anyway, not to get carried away with all of that, there's all kinds of much better sources about that stuff than listening to me talk about it. So I'll just mention it just as an idea to look into from more detailed sources that you can look up. So from the small scale to large scale, and interesting how when things scale up geometrically over space and mass, that you see a correlating scaling up of time framing for significant events. So all these dynamics, well, basically the middle way dynamics, taking the most simplistic window into the complexity. The middle way dynamics, it's so simple. Forces come together, and where they meet, they like to balance out. But I try to approach it in a perspective that looks at balancing out as something more intriguing than just easily taken for granted idea that, oh yeah, things balance out. So easy to just say, yeah, that's just how it is, forget and let it go, versus look at different ways of thinking about it, balancing out, finding a middle way, looking at how the middle way symmetry can be broken or shifted or deviated, and look at dynamics within it, around it. Sometimes it can be so simplistic that we don't really see any reason to look at dynamics anymore. I mean, it's broken down to everything that it can be, and yet two simple pebbles, bringing them together to add them. 1 + 1 is 2. Simple, done. Except there's a whole world of geometric expression in how they can come together, this way, that way, that all kinds of different ways, and you can spend forever there with just two little pebbles sampling the ways in which they can add together. It becomes a geometric dance. So at the root of complexity is very basic simplicity, and the complexity arises out of the variations in the geometric arrangement as a result of their dance in the system. And that middle way dynamic scaling up on the larger scale. So you'll have it dancing around for the structuring of a complex system at a small scale like that. And then that complex system stacking together with others and scaling up, and then what they scaled up into will stack in with others and scaling up and up and up. And the intricacy of complexity growing from there. And every following of it, you have the basis of just such simplicity. And so not contradictory or confusing that, well, what is it? Is it simple? Is it complex? Well, it's simplicity, and what's its function? To be simple. But then what am I doing here saying that it's functioning to create complex systems? So all of possibility is what it's about. So this duality that it has to be this or it has to be that is the confusion, whereas the middle way dynamics, that all things are of it, That's a different perspective and more accommodating of all things, which is including simplicity and complexity, including the small scale and the large scale. Scales too small for us to perceive as well. Scales too large for us to perceive also. The middle way dynamics in their action, in their dance, very well includes the distribution of forces, coming together, things meeting in the middle, making deposits at that middle way. That's forces playing out, and geometry structuring itself according to the distribution of forces. Is the distribution of forces making the geometry? Is the geometry making the distribution of forces? Could it be chicken and egg dilemma again? So one of the things about physics is that when you're looking for symmetry, one of the solid places to have it show as a fundamental part of nature is when you're working with forces, how forces work, all kinds of equations and calculations you can do for precision, and not just estimates, but getting it right, getting it so right that you can plan how to force a rocket ship off the Earth at the right place, right time, at the right rate of motion, and direction of travel, and changes of direction to travel along key steps of the way, so that you then arrive at a destination way out in space. What, million miles away? What are the distances that space travel are covering these days? And it has to do with forces, mass in motion. You're launching that rocket, the mass of it, putting it to motion and sending it along a direction for intended destination, a point A to a point B, navigation. And the movement and the controllability of the rocket will depend a lot on the distribution of the forces that are rocketing out of the back of it. You can't just have the rocket blast just forcing its way out any old way. It has to be distributed according to something that's suitable for the navigation feat it has to do. And all of those things are managed geometrically. You'll see the rocket constructed according to geometry. You'll see its nose constructed according to a vital geometric shape. You'll see the bottom of the rocket where the force to propel it is. You'll see that also constructed to a particular geometric shape, all for function of its purpose. All working together for the distribution of forces. You'd say, well, it's not putting out rocket force at the tip of the rocket, so why distributing the forces there? Well, the rocket is forcing itself through the atmosphere, and it has to distribute the atmosphere out of its way to pass through. And so there's an ideal geometric configuration for redistributing the atmosphere around it, so that the rocket isn't overwhelmed and the atmosphere isn't so agitated as to then feed back into the rocket and disturb the rocket in other ways. So all of that works out as a balancing act. All the parameters balanced out for an ideal result. A balancing act, which entails finding a middle way. You'll see scientists doing their their graphs, your x-axis, your y-axis, and charting things one side relative to the other and making a middle way shape. It doesn't always have to run straight through the middle. It can meander, changing dynamics, changing the parametrics. So anyway, I hope I haven't answered questions precisely and settled any matter to closure with this, because my goal was to poke at wide general simplicity in the face of complexity. And that's how you get the nerve or the type of focus it takes to address complexity. You look for the simplicity in it. I know that's kind of like saying, well, how do you face the night? Well, you look for the daylight in it. Well, it's either night or day. You don't go to day to find the night, and you don't go to night to find the day. So why do you go to complexity to find simplicity? Why do you find... So when you think carefully about it, you'll see that the day and the night live in the same space-time continuum. The daylight has nowhere to be except in the same space and reality that the nighttime exists. So there's something about the frame of mind in how we approach things. And so my intent was to open up the perspective for making it possible to address an important issue that's so easily just left as untenable, something that you can't do anything about, and yet we're so vulnerable to it, especially when it comes to disasters. It could be anything from the waters here turning to hurricane force events. It could be tectonic plate movements causing earthquakes and generating tsunamis, or volcanic eruptions. And all of those things matter and do so much damage. We run around in so many other ways trying to make our lives safer. The extent that we'll go to among each other, just trying to make ourselves safe from each other, what we'll do to each other just to be safe from each other, and how little we do, or how little we put our focus towards the real powerful, more catastrophic things. And we live in perspectives, predominantly in perspectives that kind of foil or defeat our ability to address our most pressing problems. And there is a way to see through all of that, to see through and beyond all of that, for a way forward in the process of relieving ourselves from what we've been so vulnerable to, that basically overcoming. So it's possible, but possibility is always shrouded in perspective. And just like the middle way, perspective goes both ways. It can work for you, it can work against you. And who knows, maybe sometimes you need perspective games to work against you when you yourself aren't working in your own favor. But most of the time we need to work in favor of ourselves and everybody, on the small scale and on the large scale. understanding, and out of that gaining problem solving ability. And then having an easier time at life. There'll probably still be other problems to deal with once you solve a complex system problem and you're no longer so vulnerable to it. And so you move on to the next problem and you whittle away at one vulnerability at a time for the benefit of an improvement. I wouldn't get so get high expectations towards perfection and having a life that's free from any blemish of vulnerability. There's something about having some struggle and difficulty, but at the same time, just as important to not have to go through too much, which is why it seems to make sense to take on the big problems, the complex ones that seem impenetrable, for figuring out their secrets. Not as a matter of challenge and good sport. I mean, if you find yourself busy at it and you feel a sense of challenge and good sport about it, nothing wrong with that. But just doing it out of bare life survival necessity, what else is there to do with life except find ways forward in the process of being life or being alive? And if there's something working against that, then that's something you need to work on and figure it out and come to a middle way so that you can get along with your life purpose of being alive. Sometimes the purpose really is that simple. And you know what? As complex as life can be, that's exactly what we need, is the most simplistic basis from which to go. The same way we take on the complex system problem, looking for the most simplistic basis, the middle way. All right, so I think I've said enough. I don't want to do too many videos. Just keep going around the same blocks, turning the same circle, chasing the same tail over and over again. I mean, that's a fundamental part of life, but no need for me to do it on video after video after video when I'm not really trying to answer any specific questions or settle any matter for closure. Just open up the perspective, and then whoever cares about this, you can find your own many ways in your own life and circumstances and conditions where you can do your cycling through the process of middle way in expression.